Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhusya Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vedyat Ravinam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matra Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshmi Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. So, Mark, what verse are we on? What chapter are we in?
Words, chapter 17, verse 19, page 289.
Okay. So, we're again continuing our discussion of samadhi, what it is and its use. We've finished the section on fleeting samadhis. So let's review the kinds of samadhis that the scriptures talk about. There's the samadhi of the Raja Yogis, which frequently is what we call a jada samadhi. Jada here means inert. And you huff and puff and you do your bandhas and you stop everything and your experience is, I see nothing. But one does not lose the sense of individuality. Now, you can get high. All that oxygen in your blood is like hyperventilating and stuff like that. So many people think, oh, spiritual, I'm having an experience. Jada samadhi, it's inert. Then we have savikalpa samadhi. This is the frame that Shankara uses, which I like. And this is when you've developed the capacity to intensely introvert the mind. At least for some periods during the day, you're not letting the mind extrovert into the world of name and form. Mind and meditation while you're in the world. We're on the doorway of the infinite. We may even have moments where the mind is very quiet and you sense the no-thingness of the self, perhaps when you're in the presence of the teacher or in a group meditation or at a moment of inspiration. There's still little attachments and identifications. And then if we continue to keep cutting away all these attachments to the world, all these identifications with any personal sense of self, then in a moment between our thoughts, with the attentive faculty introverted, this radical reversal of the attentive faculty, it's clear to me there's no person. Some people, when the mind enters into nirvikalpa, it's this big wang. Everything stops and it's a timeless state. You may be in it for minutes or hours even. We have stories in the scriptures of so-and-so was in nirvikalpa samadhi for 12 years, etc. That may be poetry. Doesn't need to last very long. For others of us, it can just be a little shift, a click. Depends on how gross the equipment is, how much of a thunderous shift it is. Listen carefully. Know about nirvikalpa, don't go chasing it. Instead, keep focusing on aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. We talked a bit about fleeting samadhis, momentary samadhis, those moments during the day when the mind stops. We have these two technical terms, prakasha, vimarsha. Prakasha, the pure illuminating quality. And then vimarsha, when the mind is caught up in deliberation, when you're thinking about stuff. So in those moments when the mind stops its thoughting, even if it's just momentary, the nature of the self, all we get is pure illumination, becomes clear. Now, if you remember, when we go all the way back to the beginning of the book, and we had that wonderful story about Hemaleka and Hemachyuta. Actually, if you go back and reread this, you'll see that he goes through these stages. He's in meditation, he sees light. Is that the self? Goes into meditation, he sees darkness. Is that the self? He goes into meditation and falls asleep. Is that the self? How can this be the self? Because it keeps varying. Then he goes deep within and his mind stops. And he has this incredible sense of peace and he tastes the bliss of the self. And then Hema Lekha comes, and she comes up the stairs of the crystal tower. She sees him lost in samadhi, and she, my dear, my dear. And he comes out of samadhi like a drunkard. He says, my dear, how is it that you, knowing of this sublime state, are not lost in it all the time? Leave me alone. I want to go back to samadhi. She says, my dear, how can it be perfection when its gain or loss is achieved through the opening or the closing of the eyes, the length of a grain of barley? Remember that? And we now need to make sure we see the self in and through all the objects of the world and all mind states. So we're now being introduced to what's called sahaja samadhi. Sahaja means natural or continuous. And it's the knowledge, the direct experience that is without effort that I am Brahman, not a person. Ramana Maharshi used to use this example. Just like with your physical body, you do not need to do a practice to know that you're not a goat or a cow or a horse or a pig, but you know you're human. So also for the jnani, his sthita prajna, steady wisdom is, there's nobody there. And that emptiness, that ground being, the fundamental awareness of the dream-like nature of the phenomenal world. Sarvam kalvidam Brahma. All this is verily Brahman. It's verily just the play of consciousness. In terms of the names and forms, Brahma, Satyam, Jagan, Vidya, illusion. Most importantly, the jnani doesn't believe his own mind. You cannot think a real thought, including the thought I just gave you. Then there's no control. There's no practice to be done. Then the knowledge is free. It's liberated. Then you're saying it. Then do as you will. Okay, with that in mind, Ganesh, will you help us out tonight? And what page are we on, Mark?
289.
289.
Actually, if Puneet can read, that'll be good. My asthma is acting up.
Okay, Puneet, do you have a copy of the book?
Yes.
Do you need better light?
No, I'm okay. 289.
Verse 19.
Chapter 17.
Yeah.
Janakoktam iti shrutva bhuya prapachya sadvijaha rajannevam vyavahritao samadhi nirvikalpakaha sarveshamasti yadi chetat kuta sansriti arbhavet. Thus, having heard the words of Janaka, the Brahmana asked again, King, Thus, if samadhi without thought constructs exists for all in work or worldly activity, then why should there be the course of worldly life?
So again, this idea that people experience fleeting samadhis all the time. Anytime the mind is free from vimarsha, from thought, that's technically samadhi. But if that be so, why isn't everybody enlightened? If they're experiencing samadhi, scriptures say, if you experience samadhi, then you know who you are, you'll be free, you never come back. So if samadhi is that common, why do people get liberated? Why is liberation so rare? Let's see what the answer is. Going on.
Sushuptau darshane chapi jadavyakta vibhasatah purushartha sadhanatvam samadhi sattva vikalpakah shuddha sanvidvibhatatma tadbhuya sansriti katham. In sleep, as well as in the mere perception of objects, there is absence of the means for the principal object of human life, namely liberation, on account of the appearance of inert objects in mere perception and the unmanifest in sleep. But samadhi without thought constructs is of the nature of the shining of pure consciousness. Then how can there be the course of worldly life again?
So he's continuing the question. So this is the doubt. It is very clear what the scriptures say, that as long as I'm still seeing phenomena, be it objects, emotions, or thoughts, or the veiling of deep sleep, the mind cannot perceive the no-thingness of the self, which is why samadhi is so valuable. Now, let me take a little digression here. There are schools of Advaita Vedanta who say samadhi is not necessary. Theoretically, that may be so. Swamiji taught that we need samadhi. Shankara teaches in Vivekachudamani that we need samadhi. These other Advaita Vedantins that say samadhi is not necessary say, that's why we say Shankara didn't write Vivekachudamani. So it's kind of a circular argument there. Practically speaking, this is just my experience. Those people who deny the value of samadhi themselves have no bliss. When you sit with them, they can't go into that incredible sacred space. And if any of us have been around Mahatma, and we can tune to them and we drop our minds. That's different. That's different than the people who just go blah, 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 Vedanta, blah, 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 Vedanta. And what you will usually see if a person has no samadhi, they may talk the Vedanta, but they are incredibly attached to the world, the people, the places, the things and conditions. And they suffer like any other person. But then they have the Vedanta logic loop. Well, it doesn't matter because it's all an illusion. And whether I react or not, that's just an illusion. So it really doesn't matter. Let me smoke another joint. And that's nonsense. It's just nonsense. This is why a lot of these non-dualists get a bad name, because they're just as unhappy and neurotic as other people. And the reason is they have no samadhi. Why do they have no samadhi? First of all, they may not have been shown it. They don't know it exists. In Gita, Krishna says, what is day for the yogi is night for other people. And what is day for other people is night for the yogi. The yogi has another playground. And in India, we have this incredible tradition. Way back in 1974, I was living in a commune in Berkeley. And I had one of the gals in the commune, Julie Jackson. I have no idea where she is now. She took on the name Kali Julie. And she went traipsing off to India to the Mahakumbha Mela. And she had the incredible punya to get the darshan of Anandamayi Ma. And she said, you just got within 20 feet of her, and your mind was just. Time, India's greatest living saint. She had no disciples, she only had devotees, and she did not teach. She was grace incarnate. We have this great tradition of India, of these Mahatmas. And that's very different than the person who just has the non-duality wrapped up. Don't settle for cheap stuff. Any thoughts on this? Now, if you haven't had samadhi, no blame. Keep tuning up the mind. Why is samadhi difficult? I go back to one of my favorite verses, 267 in Viveka Chudamani. Even after realization of the truth, there exists the strong impression that one is the doer and the enjoyer, which is the cause for rebirth. What he means there is I get re-identified. It needs to be conscientiously rooted out, steady and continuous identification with the self. Keeping the mind absorbed. It is the annihilation of the vasanas here and now that is considered liberation. All right, going on, next verse.
Etadeva hi vijnana magnana kulanashanam nirvikalpa samadhyakhyam yanni shreya sakaranam. For this alone, called nirvikalpa samadhi, is the pure knowledge, revealing one's essential nature and destroying the multitude of ignorance, and which is the cause of liberation.
So, what is the fruit of nirvikalpa? It destroys my ignorance, meaning this deeply rooted belief that I think I'm a person. So let go again of romantic notions of what you think nirvikalpa is supposed to be. Far more important, do you know who you are? If you have doubts, keep doing tapas. You have no doubts. Revel in yourself. Don't try to be an enlightened person. Am I enlightened or am I not enlightened? Is this it? You know, along the path that will happen. You've had some bona fide experience. Drop it. If you think you're an enlightened person, you're a fool, because there's only two mind states. You either think you're a person, which means you're in ignorance, or you know you're Brahman. Brahman, an enlightened person, is the lighted being, but you've always been that. The mark of the jnani is he doesn't think he's a person. So this is the value of nirvikalpa. The mind is then shown, all doubt is diminished. What happens? You're in meditation, then the mind stops. And then when the mind returns, oh, there's nobody there. There's this vast, empty space of consciousness. And you see that it's the very awareness of the most ordinary waking state. You're at the damn supermarket looking for salad. And when are you ever not you? Never goes away once you see what it is. Oh, Jim, I had an experience of the self, but I lost it. No, you're confused still. You can't lose yourself. Still confusing things with mind states. Next verse.
Jim, I have a comment, not very well formed, but I'll attempt it nevertheless.
All right.
There are, particularly, for example, some of the disciples of Papaji. Are you familiar with Papaji?
I know who he is. I don't know much about him.
Right. There are a couple of his disciples like Muji and a few other people who would be classified as sort of New Age or Neo-Vedantins. And they make it, make it a point to say that that there is a lot that you can, without trying to climb Mount Everest, there is a lot of value in trying to recognize things as they already are. And I don't know, I find that that's also useful. Because something like Nirvikalpa Samadhi seems like this unclimbable Mount Everest, and that can be very disheartening to a lot of seekers, I feel. So having something along the way, which works and gives you results in a more immediate time frame. I think there's some value to that as well.
I agree with you. I agree with you. And the teaching has a valuable practice and viewpoint for us all the way along.
Mm.
You're absolutely right. But I would think of it this way. When I was in elementary school, I learned to count and add and subtract. Then I got into middle school, and in 8th grade, I finally took algebra. And I went into high school, and I had trigonometry and plane and solid geometry and all that other stuff. But these mathematicians who are dealing with real and unreal numbers and all the kinds of equations where they're figuring out how the universe works, you know, way beyond me. Way beyond me. But I can still count out how many potatoes I need for the recipe I'm doing tonight. You know, I know enough math, very practical stuff, you know. Spiritual life is the same. So it's not this is good and that's and don't cut yourself short, Uday. What will happen is if the teaching that this text is addressing, and this is the text we're doing.
Right.
We're not doing Tattva Bodh. We're not doing chapter 3 of Gita. You know. So this text is dealing with these very subtle teachings because there are students who are here who are hungry for this. But who knows where you may be in 6 months? And now you know that I've been reading and studying this text since the 70s. So who knows? Who knows what is available to you and who you might meet. Just keep practicing.
Right.
Vedanta boils itself down into some very simple practices. Go ahead, act in the world according to your prarabdha, according to your swadharma. Do your best to let go of your attachments to the things of this world. Do your best to let go of identification with a personal sense of self. In Gita, Krishna says, even a little of this knowledge frees us from great fear. Is that of use?
Yes, Jim, very much. I like the
Very
analogy.
good question. But let me share something with you. Westerners who come to this have an advantage that Indians don't. Indians revere Nirvikalpa. They revere the knowledge. There's this great veneration of the saints, the Mahatmas and the Gurus. And we approach them with such respect and reverence and awe. to the point that our minds say, I could never do that.
Yeah.
Westerners enter into it and they go, well, why can't I have this? You know, they don't have all the cultural stuff.
Right.
That
Absolutely.
makes sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, yes, our reverence, our devotion, the fact that the whole society is imbued. I mean, you go to a taxi cab in the USA and there's rap music. You go to India and they're playing bhajans. You know, it's
Right.
everywhere in India.
Oh, I go to the barber and he's playing Vishnu Sahasranam at 8 a.m.
Yes, yes. It's everywhere. And there's great, great value in it. But there's also this super reverence that, well, what we were talking about the other night, this imposter syndrome. Can't happen to me.
Mm.
Now, there's
Yeah.
a price tag with it. And the price tag is you have to be willing to let go of your attachment to everything you've ever thought was important and of value.
Right.
And that terrifies many people. It's not painful at all. It's not painful at all. True story. So I had a terrible fear of poverty when I was young.
Mm.
It was my mother's mindset. She was raised in the US during the Depression. She came from dirt poor farm stock in the Midwest during the Dust Bowl. You know, she was working as a domestic when she was a little girl. She was, and that kind of sunk in. And there was one day in the ashram that I had a question for Ram, one of the guys who ran it. He was out living out in the avenues. And I had 25 cents to my name. So I got my bus, I put it in the bus thing, got my transfer, went out to 26th Avenue from the Haight-Ashbury, had my talk with Ram, turned around and came back, and I was going to cheat. I was going to use the transfer. I get on the bus, and the bus driver says, this is in the wrong direction and it's expired, so you have to get off. So I didn't even have 25 cents for the bus. And guess what? Nothing happened. It was a gorgeous spring day in San Francisco. I had nothing to do. And so I walked from 26th Avenue back to the Haight. Took me an hour, maybe an hour and 20 minutes. But a glorious day. And I had never felt such freedom. And the fear was gone. It's never come back.
Wonderful.
But that's the promise. If we let go, underneath is freedom.
Thanks for
All right.
sharing the story.
Pardon me?
Thanks for sharing this.
Oh, it's just, but we all have these. We all have these things, all these things that we think we're going to just be crushed if they happen, and they happen, and we're okay. Because nothing touches the self. Nothing ever does. All right, next verse.
Etanmeshan sa Rajendra sarvasanshaya nashanam ityaprishto mahipala praham tam muni pungavam. King, tell me this, removing all my doubts. Thus asked the king, said to that distinguished sage.
So we just articulated the doubt. How come these fleeting samadhis don't free people? Going on.
Shrinu Brahman pravakshyami rahasyam param tvidam agnyātat sansritiriyam pravritta nadikalatah. Brahmana, I shall tell you the supreme secret. Listen, this course of worldly life is flowing from beginningless time due to ignorance.
So the course of worldly existence flows because of beginningless ignorance. Now, we have to look at ignorance microcosmically and macrocosmically. Usually the word that we use for macrocosmic ignorance is Maya. Maya is an inherent power of Brahman, and it's co-eternal with Brahman. So the light show doesn't go away. Because of Maya, individual egos exist, beings who are identified with their bodies. Now, avidya is usually the term, or ajnanam, sometimes that's used, usually avidya, is personal ignorance, my non-apprehension of reality. So for you and me, it is possible to stop the flow of worldly existence. This is dangerous, Jim. Does that mean if someone gets enlightened, the whole world's going to crash and burn and come to a stop? No. But your understanding of it will profoundly change. So we have two classic images about ignorance: snake in the rope, mirage waters in the desert. Snake in the rope is like nirvikalpa samadhi. Snake in the rope. Oh, I'm so scared there's a snake. The Guru says, inquire, see if there's really a snake there. I inquire into it. There's no snake. It's a wet piece of rope. How could I have been so deluded? Listen very carefully now. In that example, when you apprehend the rope, the snake is not available for apprehension. Gone. It's not there. In nirvikalpa samadhi, the individual disappears and the world disappears. Gone. Not available for experience. Now, mirage waters in the desert. You're driving through the desert and you see the mirage. Your senses report water and your understanding is water. You keep driving. See, this makes the car go when you move the wheel like this. You keep driving. You see the water recede. And you realize, oh, it's an optical illusion. It's heat waves off the desert. Your senses continue to report what looks like water, but your understanding is sand. So in sahaja samadhi, the senses of the man of wisdom continue to report a world of name and form. You drive to work, you buy your groceries, you take a shower, you clean the kitchen, you do all the things that everybody else does. But your understanding is it's all just a light show. There's a substratum, consciousness, that's never moved or touched. And the self in me is never touched by any other. So this person has disappeared worldly existence too. It's not what it seems. Next verse.
Sukha dukkha vabhasanam pravahatma taya sthita swapnavat sanstata sarvaihi sarvada bhuyate. It exists with the nature of a continuous flow of appearances which are pleasant and painful. It is extended like a dream and is experienced by everyone always.
So this play of worldly existence keeps going on when the environment is conducive. And how is that determined? Simply by the force of my past. My mind is happy. When the environment is non-conducive, what determines that? The force of my past. The mind is unhappy. Just like a dream. Now, if you have a dream that you're at a banquet and eating delicious food, when you wake up, is that real? If you have a nightmare, you're being chased by monsters, you're terrified. When you wake up, is that real? Which is more real, the banquet or the nightmare? No. Anything seen in the dream is not real. It's the nature of the dream. Now listen carefully. In the second chapter of the Mandukya Upanishad, the chapter titled Vaitatya, falseness. I think it's the fourth Karika. Gaudapada says, the phenomenal world is quite unreal. And the proof of its unreality is that you can see it. Anything seeable, knowable, cognizable is mithya, illusion, vaitatya, false, pratibimba, like reflections in a mirror. But because of ignorance, I think this play of worldly existence is real. I think I'm a person. I think the world out there of name and form is separate from me and has joy-giving and misery-producing qualities. All that is because of my personal ignorance, avidya. which itself is the product of Maya, the Lord's play. Next one.
Nivrittasya tu jnanad evati prabhibhavitam tajnanam savikalpam syat ajnanasya prabhadanam. The cessation of that course of worldly life is ascertained to be through knowledge alone. That knowledge, removing the ignorance, should be savikalpa or with thought constructs. There's a note. Ascertainment through investigation involves the mind and the intellect. This should precede the realization of the true principle.
So here he says, first is savikalpa, the ascertainment of the truth, while I perceive objects and while there's still some vimarsha, some thoughting, tuning up the mind. We have what's called the jnana abhyasa, the practice of knowledge. All of this is like a dream. Don't get involved. Let everything you experience through the senses pass through. I love the image Shankara says, it's like a wicker basket. And you pour water in and the water just runs out. Modern day image, the colander you have when you're making pasta. Pour the water with the pasta and it just goes through. So you've done very well. You are smart. You are good looking. You are the best. Let it pass through. You're terrible. You're stupid. You didn't do a very good job. You are a mess. Let it pass through. Be empty. Empty. Now, when we were around Swamiji, if we weren't empty, he'd lean on that button like nobody's business. You let go. Drop. But life itself is the best guru. Let it go. Next verse.
Nirvikalpa kavijnanat ajnanam na nivartate. Nirvikalpa na vijnanam kenachinna virudyate. Ignorance does not cease through knowledge without thought constructs, because knowledge without thought constructs is not opposed to or inconsistent with anything.
So we have to have the understanding. So in these fleeting samadhis, the reason these fleeting samadhis do not free people is two things. They don't know what they're looking for and where their attention is. So you heard me talk a couple weeks ago, you're on the BART train and you're holding on to the strap and your mind goes away and you come back. And what have you realized? Back of BART seat. But here, we're first of all exposed to the supreme truth through the scriptures, through the guidance of the Guru. And then at these auspicious moments, Your mind is doing nothing. Who are you? You get this recognition. The mind has an aha, pratyabhinyana, the recognition. Oh, I get it. There's nothing there. What is it that gets it? It's the mind. Remember, both bondage and liberation occur in the mind. The self is ever free. What is liberation? When the mind gets its own unreality, when the mind gets that when it posits a personal sense of self, that's foolishness. And it can drop that stuff. When the mind starts regretting the past and projecting into the future, knowledge comes in. Well, that's stupid. What the hell am I doing that for? Oh, Shiva. Next verse.
Nirvikalpam jnanamiti kevalam jnanamuchyate tatraiva hi vikalpanam ulekhat savikalpakam. Pure knowledge is called, oh, sorry, I think I missed one. I skipped one. I'll read the English of the page. Knowledge without thought constructs is the substratum of that which with thought constructs and is settled like a screen for the appearance of various pictures.
So, when the mind is free from thought, I alone am there illuminating. When thoughting happens, I am there illuminating the thought. When am I ever absent? Who is the knower of the field in all fields? What is that knowledge by which everything is known, without which nothing can be known? I am there. I am nirvikalpa. It's my nature. The light show comes, the light show disappears, the light show changes. What concern have I with the light show? Pretty pictures. Next one.
Should I just read the English of the next one?
I don't know what you're doing, so go ahead. Whatever you're doing, do it.
Pure knowledge is called nirvikalpa jnana, or knowledge without thought constructs. Due to the writing of thought constructs in that pure knowledge alone, it is considered as savikalpa or having thought constructs.
So here, he's using savikalpa a little bit differently than Shankara does. So when we teach nirvikalpa, we always teach two approaches. Listen carefully, Shranahu. First, it is that mind state of no mind. It is that mind state when the mind is no more. And when the mind returns from nirvikalpa, it has the aha. But nirvikalpa means yourself. You are always nirvikalpa, meaning the self in you has no perturbations, no thought, no qualities. And thought, perception, senses, etc., are fundamentally illusory. They rise, they change, they fall, but they never alter or touch the substratum, which is nirvikalpa. Aham nirvikalpa. I am nirvikalpa. So again, we're moving into this understanding. The jnani just doesn't believe the mind. Next verse.
Ajnanam savikalpakhya. Ajnanam eva na chetarat. Tadane kavidham karya. Akarana mataya sthitam. Ignorance is only knowledge called savikalpa or with thought constructs and not another. That ignorance exists variously in the form of cause and effect.
So we can say here that the savikalpa state, consciousness plus vimarsha, deliberation, the perception of the phenomenal world and the deliberation, the chintya about it. And if I think that stuff is real, that is ignorance. That is bondage. So what actually happens, the light of awareness, this prakash, is always there. But the first vritti is ajnanam, ignorance. The non-apprehension of myself as Brahman. Then, when I see the light show of the world, I shows up, Jim, and I take all that stuff as separate from me and real. That is ajnana. That is samsara. That is the mind. That is the wheel of sorrow. That is birth and death. That's my bondage. That is the problem. If you think you're a person, you're deluded. If you know you are Brahman, all is well. Ego always says, resolve the struggle of ego. I.e., the ego need to go from point A to point B. Yoga says, if I can recognize, oh, I'm identified, I think I'm a person, then you can drop it. Remember who you are. Let go. Next verse.
Karanam swatmapurna tva yati rupam udiritam chidatma purna evam syat avachcheda vivarjanat avachcheda na hetunam kaladinam hi sadhakah. The causal ignorance is said to be of the nature of absence of knowledge of the wholeness of one's own self. The self that is consciousness should only be whole on account of the exclusion of limitation. For it is that which brings about or accomplishes time and the rest, which are the causes of limitation.
So again, my bondage is nothing more than the ignorance of my self-nature. That's all there is to it. The cause of it, the veiling power of Varana Shakti, Vasana. The veiling power is always followed by projecting or agitating power, Vikshepa Shakti. That's all my problems are. What is the antidote for ignorance? Antidote for ignorance is knowledge. How do I acquire the knowledge of myself? I'm inspired to do what I need to do by the scriptures. It's not knowledge that's in the book itself. Shankara thunders, without knowledge of the self, study of the scriptures is futile. With knowledge of the self, study of the scriptures is again futile. What do I need a scripture for? I have become Upanishad. But in the dance between the teacher and the student, we're taught specific ways of inquiry. Atma Vichara. What do I mean? Purify the mind. And a mind that is Vishuddha, extremely pure. Introvert your attention. Who am I? Shankara says in the Nirvana Shaptakam, Chidananda Rupam, Shivoham, Shivoham. My form is bliss consciousness. Shiva. Auspiciousness. One more.
Tatha vidhatmana khyati purnattvena ya stitata atra dhuna smiti rupa mula jnanam hi sa bhavet tasyaiva pallava prayam dehatmatvadi bhasanam. That kind of knowledge of the self which exists as the non-wholeness of the self can alone be the causal ignorance of the nature of I exist here at this time. Appearing with the selfhood of the body in this manner is like the sprout of that causal ignorance alone.
So, in fancy words, he's basically saying, my ignorance is I think I'm my body. I am this person that exists at this time in this place. I do these actions. I don't do those. I love this person. I hate that person. All that stuff. And it starts with Jiva Bhavana, the attitude or feeling that I'm a person. That's all there is to my ignorance. And it is adhyasa, it's superimposition. It's not an entity. It's not some horrible cosmic thing that I have to work on, a horrible, terrible ignorance. No. It's not, oh, my past karma, I have karmic debt that I have to pay off. No. to the center of it. Remember who you are. And if you fall from that state and you think you're a person, come back. And don't worry about that. Think of it like, oh my God, I had the most terrible dream last night. Just the same way. Be woke. Okay, we'll stop here tonight. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Bhyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om. What verse are we on next week?
You're going to do 34.
34 next week. Thank you all. Good class tonight.